Welcome to Communication, Connection, Community, the Podcaster's Podcast. This podcast takes a deep dive into modern-day communication strategies in the podcasting space. We chat with interesting people who make the podcasting and speaking spaces exciting and vibrant. We also dive into the podcasting community with news, updates, latest trends and topics from this ever-evolving space. So strap in. It's going to be one amazing ride. Let's dive into today's episode. David Osk. He's the driving force behind StatGuardPlus.com, a product showcased in over 3,000 retail giants like the Home Depot and Lowe's. Alongside this success, David is passionate about understanding the difference between grit and resilience and why so many misunderstand true authenticity and identity. Uniqueness of purpose and understanding our true north identity changes everything. David is the lead coach for Dr. Andy Garrett's True North Blueprint, which helps people become the most resilient people on earth. He's working on his new book for fathers called The Guardians of Grit, How to Raise Uncrushable Young People. In his spare time, David sings. Yes, he does sing. And on stages all over the country. I'm assuming you mean all over the US of A. Not come to Canada yet. David's voice has been compared to Andrea Bocelli and Josh Groban. Very, very cool. By the way, I should also say he is a podcaster and a sought-after podcast guest, and we are so glad he's joining us today. David Osk, welcome to the podcast.
Honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so thrilled you're joining us because today, this is something we haven't covered. We've talked about podcasting and speaking and communication, how all of those things are important in business, but I don't think we've talked about in greater detail what the difference is between resiliency and grit, and we certainly haven't shared factors in or how it plays into the world of podcasting. So I'm glad you're here to share about that. But first, let's talk about your success with StatGuardPlus.com, because to say that it's in over 3,000 retail giants is that in itself, I'm assuming, leads to our discussion about resiliency and grit. So tell me about the journey that led to the success.
You know, of course, during the process of landing Home Depot and Lowe's, of course, I wasn't necessarily thinking about being, real gritty and, resilient, as it were. Required that. But those are some things, some tools, as it were, and concepts that I really learned, in many ways, the hard way. I think a lot of my ability just to keep going was necessarily the right motives. I was just afraid, be a failure and look like an idiot, as opposed to, maybe somebody who had really done some internal work and was really, I guess on mission, right? And really passionate about, doing what I was doing, and a much younger man, when I was doing those things. And even since then, I've been surrounded by some people that have really helped me to kind of build that self-awareness and inner constitution and understand, why I'm doing the things I'm doing. But a lot of the internal narrative was forged in fire back in the day, about 11, 12 years ago when I started that business. Yeah, that's one heck of a story to get to 3,700 stores.
Well, congratulations on that success.
Thanks.
I certainly can't sidestep that at all, because you don't get to that level of success without some resiliency, but also some failures, some headaches, some heartaches. But then also, isn't it true that when we're in that space as business owners or entrepreneurs, that there's the fear of failure? But if we put our head down and go to work, something's got to stick eventually. And I don't mean let's throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, but keeping the head down and working, and it's like, okay, that didn't work, but I got to try something else. Otherwise, you're going to get a job like everybody else, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is about 6 years ago, I met a guy named Dr. Andy Garrett. He's in my entrepreneurial mastermind group. And, he started kind of breaking these concepts down, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, identity, authenticity, resiliency, grit, the difference, that kind of stuff. And how do you really establish those things, from an internal, set point, an internal compass? In fact, he names his course that we walk people through, the True North Blueprint. So I kind of like to, start painting the picture, with regards to True North versus magnetic north. The imagery, right, really helps distill what's happening, inside of us. So, if you have a compass, right, you want to find north. Well, what is it doing? It's reading the magnetic field around it in order to find north. So you'll notice when you're walking through the woods with a compass, or even your home for that matter, it's not arrow, as it were, is not 100% north ever. I mean, well, maybe for just a split second, right? But it doesn't stay there. It's constantly kind of moving back and forth. Whereas, true north is a fixed point. It's like GPS coordinates, that you can describe in absolute detail to pinpoint accuracy. And so what's fascinating is, when someone walks you through, as it were, a curriculum, right? They ask you the right questions in the right sequence. You can really dial in, that internal plumb line, which again is everything from values, convictions, motivations, right? Your why. And I like to say, what is it that gives you goosebumps? It's all of that stuff that makes you unique so that you can literally grab onto that and start using it from an internal perspective as opposed to, and Carl, this is what I suffered with when I was starting my business, right? I was so extrinsically motivated, meaning I'm getting really vulnerable here. I just wanted to be somebody, or at least not be a nobody. What's the real question there? Right? Who was I handing the keys to? I wanted people around me, to tell me, as it were, or give me some sort of feedback that, David, you've actually done something with your life and you've arrived or you've done, you know what I mean? And it's exhausting because the feedback we get is never enough. And since then, I've been able to, position, my driving force to people like it's Seth Godin. People like us do things like this. And I want to have this type of an impact in this particular arena today. It might be a little bit of a different arena tomorrow, depending on what I'm working at. But those things have a cohesiveness to them that have, the David Osk shaped, dent on them. So that's kind of a deep way to say that, understanding that internal compass is really, really important.
I'm glad you shared all that. And I do want to comment on you've arrived. And do we ever really arrive?
Yeah, no.
Or is it when we arrive, guess what? The bar has now shifted yet again. So it's like, yeah. I have a coach that tells me this all the time. While you're at this level, guess what? You'll only be comfortable there for so long before you'll be ready, or you'll be thinking that it's time to get to the next level, or there's something that'll charge you. And maybe it's a spouse, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's circumstantial of economy or a changing industry. I work in the podcasting space and it's ever evolving. So if you were to ask me, 5 or 6 years ago, how did you launch your podcast? It would be a completely different answer then to what it is now, because now it's all video, and SEO, and make sure you have this in your show notes. All this stuff that it didn't matter back then. Of course it mattered, but it didn't matter as much, So there's that. The other thing I wanted to mention too, or ask you this question is, how many people are stuck on magnetic north versus true north? And is it in your experience, is it an easy fix to get people to shift accordingly, their internal compass?
It's a really great question. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would dare say that in my experience that probably 90% of people, get up in the morning, and maybe I'll back into it this way. They get up in the morning and they're looking for, approval. They're hoping their boss or their parents or someone gives them some type of feedback. And until they get that extrinsic, hit, as it were, they have some insecurity. They're not sure if they're doing what they quote unquote should be doing and, all that kind of thing. So what I think is fascinating is, when Dr. Andy kind of explained it to me this way, when someone is operating, out of that true north plumb line, actually, let me back into it. How do you know you haven't found that, right? How do you know you haven't lasered in on that? This sometimes is a better way of distilling that is, you're going to suffer probably some imposter syndrome, right? You're going to show up in a room or with other people or other podcasters. You're going to start comparing yourself to other people and just, think somehow that I'm lacking or I'm not good enough. You're probably going to have a deeper sense of anxiety. You might, avoid certain people or places because of that comparison, right? You're just so desperately seeking some external force. You might become apathetic towards certain things, right? Procrastination, feeling like you're stuck, maybe depression, right? If it gets bad enough. Well, how do you know that you're operating from that plumb line? Well, on a basic level, you start to feel more genuine, right? You get up in the morning and you're like, hey, it feels really good to be me. I can describe the guy who just woke up and the dent that I want to have in the universe, the type of people that I want to hang out with, the types of conversations that I like to have, the things I'm going to say yes and no to. I've already predetermined those things as opposed to, licking my finger and holding it up in the wind. You're going to feel a bit more free, resilient, compassionate, have clarity of purpose. You're going to feel like you're more best, your best self is kind of emerging. You're trusting yourself more. That sense of clarity is there. And those two positions, right? Anxiety, imposter syndrome, apathy, avoidance versus genuine, courageous, compassionate, resilient, free. It's Dr. Andy says, follow the clues. How do you know you're operating? Well, follow the clues. So it's not to say, by the way, that on any given day, we don't, an off day or whatever, an off week for that matter, we're human. But I would say, what does the course of, 90 days look like? Or 6 months or a year? Is your life defined by apathy, avoidance, fatigue, imposter syndrome, or is it defined by, clarity, resilience, joy, mission, purpose, feeling natural in your own skin, that kind of thing? And there's a big shift. And it's amazing when you have identified that stuff, right? Identity, that's where we get that word. You identified all of the things that make you you, and you start operating in that way. You remove that question mark, right? That question mark is kind of gone that you feel. But guess what? Everybody else feels that question mark as well. We've all been around people who are just, coming out of their skin nervous, and, they might even overcompensate for certain things, or they get, really irritated really fast, or, and again, it's a clue. It's okay. We're human, and nobody, showed them how to do that. But I would say, to answer your question, I think it's a rather high percentage of people that are reading the room and desperately looking for someone else to say that, yes, you're good enough.
Wow. A long way to the answer, but you hit on a real list of things that I think as solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, even
Oh,
successful
yeah.
business,
We all deal with it
massive companies deal with that all the time. And sometimes the person or the thing that needs taking care of the most is you. It could be a
every
fatigue
time.
thing. It could be a health thing. Like, full disclosure, I mean, I'm going through that right now with sleep apnea. How's that affecting me in the business world? Not in the business world, but in my own business head, things like that. So you never know,
Affects everything.
but those things affect the calibration of the compass, as it were, with where you're going. So bigger question is, why are we talking about this on this show? And how is it related? How are we relating, resiliency? Firstly, we'll go back to the difference between resiliency and grit. And how is it playing into the podcasting space? So let's go there, because you've been a guest on many podcasts. You've been a host. So let's define it. What is the difference between grit and resiliency?
Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit. She's kind of, I would say she's probably the world's, authority, in our time on grit. And I think she distills, the word grit down into this idea of, doing hard things over a long period of time because it's worth it, right? You've deemed what's on the other side of that hill is worth fighting for, climbing that hill. Here's the interesting thing, though, is grit, as far as this idea of a long period, you know what? That might be 24 hours, depending on what the situation is, right? You might be running a marathon. That might be 2 hours. It might be, 90 days where you're getting your business going and there's all sorts of uncertainty and you got a cold call and you got to do all kinds of stuff. It might be, you're having a hard time in your marriage, raising kids. But again, let me put a pin in that. So resiliency, though, is, and this is the way Dr. Andy describes it, this idea of bouncing back quickly, right? You get knocked down and you get back up. But here's the difference. He likens it to like a basketball. So that basketball, you bounce it on the ground really hard for just a split second. It loses its form, but then it bounces back to what? A describable shape. It has a literally a circumference and everything that you can measure and pinpoint with accuracy. And that's where this idea of true north comes into play, when talking about, grit and resiliency. You actually, in order to build intrinsic, grit, as it were, as opposed to people pleasing and applause or shame and fear, you actually start describing, that plumb line. So, for instance, when you get knocked down and you get back up, you're not getting back up just for the sake of getting back up. You're getting back up and you're taking on the form and hopefully a really quick moment to who you are, right? Who and what, right? It describes, hey, okay, let me tell a quick story. A friend of mine, we were at church here a few weeks ago, and she's walking, across the sidewalk, and it was raining, and she slipped, right? So she lands, on her backside in the water. Well, so many people would be so embarrassed. And this person has got such a wonderful inner constitution and is absolutely so solid with who they are. They thought it was funny, right? They were just like, was that just awesome or what? Like they didn't, you could tell, like they were glad it happened. Whereas some people, they would slip and fall and they would leave. They would be so filled with shame and, oh, I'm dirty and all, whatever it is. But they were like, was that hilarious or what? And we can kind of blow by something like that. But I'll be honest, I think that things that happen in a split second and how we handle them, really start to, kind of shine a light on, what's going on in that plumb line. Have you established that? And so for me personally, I love this idea of establishing a plumb line with a lot of grace wrapped around it.
My favorite thing about that story you just shared is it's probably a line from several movies that people have played on before where somebody falls or something doesn't go right the way it's supposed to. And if that were me, and I've probably done it before, not realizing, say something like, I meant to do that, or, and now for my next trick, or it's not exactly the finish I was hoping for, like something that takes something that's you know, it's like serious. It's not like she flight of stairs and is in severe pain and needs to be rushed to hospital. She slipped on the ground, probably happened to many people many times. But the analogy that you gave of people who are just like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe that happened versus, wow, what'd you think of that move I just did? So,
and it's almost like this idea of, isn't it just fantastic to be human? And here's the cool thing, right? We all know people, Andy Garrett or Dr. Garrett calls, this type of a person an authentic exemplar, like authenticity, authentic, right? And he says that those people, not only when they walk into the room, and we all know people like this in our lives, right? The room gets better, wiser, safer, stronger, more joyful, things like that. And sadly, there's kind of a small percentage of people that we can kind of be like, holy cow, that person is just exuding with just beautiful authenticity. It's those people, right, who tend to, laugh at themselves really quickly and be like, oh my gosh, isn't it just great to be human? They're not like so wrapped up in performance-based living. It's just, and here's the cool thing, right? It's the way that they just simply act and be. It's an invitation to that world. It's an invitation to their inner world. And there's something curious about that. I just find that so attractive.
speaking of performance, though, I will share this too. I remember seeing Robin Williams not on stage in person. That would have been a thrill. But anyway, seeing him on stage with one of his shows that he did, and he's partway through his monologue, and I don't remember which one it was. But he says, wait a minute, I remember this one. And there's a slight pause, and the room, he's like, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, here's this. This is a guy that was so slick and polished, and you thought he was but he made a few other mistakes in that same routine, but he just let it slide. Whereas some people would be like, oh my goodness, I made a mistake, and they'd crawl under a rock and die. And we see that in business. We see that in podcasts too, where people make a glaring error and they think, oh my God, that's it, I'm done. And hopefully they're not. Hopefully they're not done just because of something that was a human error, not an error that's cost a reputation, not something like that, but they screwed something up factually or they said the wrong word.
Yeah, join the club.
That's human.
Exactly. And it's so neat when somebody, can just let that stuff roll off because what are you doing really? You're giving yourself grace, but you're also giving other people permission to just enter into that, that more authentic space.
Podcasting is a long game, not a short game. And you definitely need some resiliency. So how is this playing in your experience? But then also, what can you share with podcasters? Because most podcasters that we work here at Podcast Solutions Made Simple, they're business owners, they're entrepreneurs, they're successful business owners for that matter. So what are some of the things that you can share with them that can help them in this area?
Yeah. So man, a great question. The first thing that came to mind, and again, Simon Sinek, he wrote the book Start With Why. Again, probably a wiser man than I am. And he's, wildly successful and so on. One of the things that I like to say is, how about we never start with why? So I'm going to back into your question, for podcasters this way. What if we started with who? So why is that important? Well, if you've not established, again, identify, right? Word identity. If you've not identified all of the things that, make you, guess what? Your why, it might be someone else's. It might be Joe Rogan's. It might be Carl Richards' why. It might be your dad's, your older brother's, or some mentor. So what's really fascinating is when you've radical clarity on who you are. Let me jump into the deep end of the pool here even further. Where do we get the word authenticity? Comes from the word author, right? I didn't make me. I didn't choose my skin color, my eye color, my taste buds. And here's the fascinating thing. We don't choose our personalities. Those of us who have kids or siblings know they come out of the gate really hardwired. And I'm talking, my two kids are teenagers now, but when Parker was born, I mean, within just a matter of weeks, like you can just sense his little essence, right? And when Kate was born, I mean, they're just so different. My nephew's 4 boys, I mean, they're so vastly different, but within weeks and months, you can tell such differences in them. And here's the cool thing with kids, right? When they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, unlike us really savvy adults, kids aren't thinking about being authentic, right? They're not thinking about identity. They're just doing their deal. Until what? Until you get punched in the face, right? You get humiliated, picked on, or whatever that is, or abused, hopefully not. And then you start questioning everything. Am I good enough? Are those things that I love, those things that I'm bringing to the world, those things that give me goosebumps, is somebody going to laugh at those things and shame those things? So I'm getting back to your question here. So I think it's vital that you identify, write it down, who you are authentically, right? And here's what's fascinating is then your why makes sense. So if you're a podcaster, and again, I'm sure you've got thousands of listeners here, when someone sits down to say, I'm going to put together a podcast and a platform so that I can make the world a better place, you better have a why that's really tied to who you are. Because guess what? You're going to have people, and Carl, I'm sure you've had this many times, right? That just cancel on you. They don't show up, right? It kind of takes a little bit of wind out of your sail. Or you have a guest that comes on and for some reason they're in a bad mood or whatever it is. And you're like, that didn't go very well. How about this? You have a hero that you want to interview and you finally get that person and it just doesn't go well. It doesn't land right or they're in a bad mood. You know what? You're going to have that intrinsic motivation, your why, to stay with it and to stay the course so that you have that particular dent in the universe, right? Your impact, that you want to have. And by the way, this is another Dr. Andy thing, right? He calls it the virtuous loop. When you understand who you are and you see your particular, dent, well, guess what? It's the feedback you get from being yourself and seeing your dent. It reinforces who you are. It's that clean fuel that kind of reinforces who you are, your why, your what, your how. You get to see the Carl Richards, the David Osk shaped dent, and it reinforces that. But again, if there's some vague idea around what that is, you're going to run out of steam rather quickly.
I think, David, one of the challenges that business owners, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, we work a lot with real estate professionals as well. What they face is in this space, and with this particular medium, we're talking podcasting here, is they hear examples. They take the Joe Rogan that they listen to, or they're listening to the Tony Robbins, whatever podcast it is, or the Oprah Winfrey this or that, and they say, I want my show to be just like that. Well, the challenge is there's only one show just like that, and it's the Joe Rogan Experience, or it's you know what I mean? So the challenge is, and it goes back to knowing your why. If you want a show that's just like that, it's never going to happen because it's not yours to have.
Exactly. Well said. And here's the interesting thing, we always hear, and it sounds so cliche, right? Just be yourself. I live in Nashville, and of course, there's a million people coming here to get famous, right? And do their thing. And you will hear people all the time, there's one of you. We don't need another, whatever the famous person's name is. We need you. And of course, I mean, why is that hard though? Why? Because what if you step out and you're acting in your authenticity, but then you get some knucklehead that gives you some poor feedback or mocks you? That hurts. That is the reason that we, even as young kids, right, we start wearing a mask. We start putting on, kind of playing a role, as it were, because we're just so afraid that, what if, what I have to offer this world is not quote unquote good enough, when of course it is. I would encourage any podcaster, and feel free to call me. I'll be happy to help connect dots, whatever I can. When you start dialing in on exactly who you are and identifying those things, you're not only going to see your podcast, right? But you're going to see your relationships with your family and friends and even yourself get so much better.
I love it. And it's so true. And we've talked about the why before on this show, but never to this depth. And usually the why, when we're presenting it, we're talking about why do you want a podcast? What's the goal? What's the outcome you want? Who's your audience? So we do that deep dive, but we're not there to do the inner why stuff. We're not there to figure out that part. We can a little bit, but that's, again, knowing who you are and knowing what you're bringing, what you want to leave behind. What is that you're bringing forward to the space? And I think that there's, again, so many podcasters, and I've seen this also in the broadcast space. I mean, again, spent 25 years in radio broadcasting. I've seen and heard a number of broadcasters who, especially in their younger years when they're coming out of college, I'm going to be the next Ryan Seacrest, or I'm going to be the next, dating myself here, I'm going to be the next Wolfman Jack. I'm going to be the next, whoever it is, I'm going to be the next. But again, there's only one of those individuals. So is that your why? Is because you want to be just like somebody else? Where's the authenticity in that? Number one. And the only person who can get away with that, well, maybe there's more than one person, but is if you're an impressionist like Rich Little. Yeah, okay, you want to be 76 people or 140 voices he's done over the years, because that's what you're doing. But that's the art. That's not, he's still, as Rich Little, he's still an authentic individual. And here's what makes him authentic.
Well said. Again, I just feel like it takes courage. It takes a little bit of work, right, to identify, your values, your virtues, your convictions. Those are different things, by the way. And a lot of people lump all that stuff together. Your strengths and how do you want to apply those things. And I always like to say, I think I got it from a Nissan commercial. What gives your goosebumps? They're just that stuff that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It's like, man, that's awesome. What is it that puts that lump in your throat in a good way? What is it that makes you furious? And if you start, doing the hierarchy of all of those things, mind, body, and spirit, I mean, it's amazing, how very unique we are, right? We've got a fingerprint, that's different, a retina scan, and a DNA that can never be replicated. And man, when you start to, I'll say it this way, when you start to honor all of that beauty and uniqueness, that's, and by the way, I'll kind of get a little bit touchy-feely here. Why am I writing a book for dads, right? You mentioned, the book at the outset, Guardians of Grit. Well, what would it look like for dads, right, to look at their sons and their daughters, for that matter, too, right, and say, hey, I see something in you so great. Let's get the shovel out and mine for gold and identify all of the beauty and riches and courage and tendencies and all those things that make you you. Because whatever you're into, I'm into. We're going to get behind that and lift that up. It's like literally raising someone. It's causing them to rise. Not some version that you want. It's causing them to rise into the person that, God made them to be. That's the kind of stuff that just absolutely lights me on fire. I'm so grateful. I've got a thermostat guard with a combination lock, right? The Stat Guard Plus. That's in 3,700 retail stores. We're the first ones in the world to have a thermostat guard with a combination lock. You know what? I'm thrilled with that. Don't get me wrong. But you know what I'm more thrilled with? I'm thrilled that I've got people that have helped me be a better human, be a better dad, be a better husband. I've been married 25 years. I've got a son who's in college in his second year. He's 19. I've got a daughter who's, 17 and a senior in high school, and she's concert master at the Vanderbilt Children's Orchestra. More than that, my two kids, can look in the mirror and smile. Right? When something's going wrong, they can come to dad, my wife for that matter, and raise their hand and say, hey, I don't feel like I'm quite tracking today. Can we talk through something? And I've got a wonderful relationship with them. That's the stuff of life. The other stuff, again, I'm thankful for that we live in a space, time, and history where we can do extraordinary things as long as you stay with it, right? Because if you want to do that, it's going to be really freaking hard. But the other stuff, that internal life is where it's at. And we all know that. That's not I heard somebody say the other day, matter stuff, right? Matter matters. But what matters? Now you're talking.
Oh my goodness, David, my goosebumps have goosebumps from the conversation that we've been having today. How can people get a hold of you for our listeners who are chiming in? They're listening to your wisdom. How can they reach out to you?
Okay, can I be a little bold here? I'm just going to say, I just finished it. It's not 100% done, but I've not talked about this yet. I'm going to tell everybody to go to my music website. So you mentioned that at the beginning. I'm actually, Andrea Bocelli was in Nashville. I was asked to sing backup for him. So if you go to David Ask, davidaskmusic.com, my contact information's on there and you can get a hold of me that way. And I've got all this other social sites and so on, but that would be a fun place to start.
That's very, very cool. And yes, we did mention it off the top. And also a very cool story about him. And if I'd known that, we might have had a journey into the music thing as well. Because I spent years as a young man, teenager and young man in music, and of course in radio too. So
awesome.
Lived around music, grew up with music. So, and music is a language unto itself that maybe we should have you back to have another conversation about music and how it's a language unto itself and how it fits into communication. Also make sure your socials and all the other relevant information is in the show notes as well.
That's great.
David, oh my goodness, what a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much. Before I turn you loose though, to go and inspire another audience like you've done with ours today, I'll leave you with the final thought.
Okay, so I've often, I'll be honest, Carl, the last 6 months, I've probably done 50, actually probably the last 4 months, 50 podcast interviews. And I like to leave people with this quote. It's kind of my favorite one over the last couple of years by Benjamin Disraeli. He's the former PM of England back in the 1800s. But he says, the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I just think, man, what a way to live. Can you imagine if that was their modus operandi, right? If their MO was to look at other people and shine a spotlight on their riches as opposed to everybody look at me, and the world would be a much different place.
For sure it would. And I think that's a great place to leave it. Until next time, David Osk, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And hey, thank you for being a part of the show today. So glad you could join us. Believe it or not, I can't work this magic by myself. So thanks to my amazing team, our audio engineer, Don Carillio, our sonic branding genius, Kenton Dilborowski, and the person who works the arms, all of our arms actually, our project manager and my trusty assistant, Jillavel Tiongo, known to us here simply as July. If you like what you heard today, let us know. You can leave us a comment or review or even send us a voice note. And if you really liked it, we hope you'll share it with your friends and your colleagues. If you don't like what you heard today, well, please feel free to share it with your enemies. And if you know of someone who would make a great guest on the show, let us know about it. You can get in touch with us by going to our show notes where all of our connection points are there, including the links to our website, LinkedIn, and Facebook as well. And if you're ready to be a guest on podcasts or even start your own show, let's have a conversation. We'll show you the simplest way to get into the podcasting space and rock it. Because, after all, we're Podcast Solutions Made Simple. Catch you again next time.